happened to my document? Ah! Hang on. I lost my document. Docs. HSGP. Agenda. All righty. Well, that was awkward. All right. Hello, all the humans. Welcome to the Humanist Society of Greater Phoenix Digital Sunday Speaker event. I'm Ron Russell, Program Director at HSGP. If you like our content, please smash the subscribe button. No, really, press the button. It really, really helps. If you want to contribute in a more material way, please become a member, donate to our Patreon account, or better yet, volunteer. Today, we have Nick Fish, the president of American Atheists, with What Now? The Fight for Our Rights Outside the Court. How this aligns with our values, the commitment to service and participation, putting our values into action in ways that positively impact our community and societies as a whole, advocating and taking action to ensure that our values are represented at the highest court in our country is actively participating in our society and culture. The commitment to peace and social justice. We have an intense commitment to social justice and affirms the human rights and personal autonomy of all people, not just a conservative religious ideology that doesn't respect the individual. And responsibility. Being a responsible person involves a steadfast attention to what is right and willfully bearing the blame or praise for our own actions or inactions. We must all stand for our values, because if you stand for nothing, what will you fall for? Nick Fish is the president of American Atheists. Nick has spent his career advocating for civil rights, civil liberties, LGBTQ equality, reproductive justice, and since 2011, the rights of atheists, agnostics, humanists, and the non-religious. Before joining American Atheists in 2012, Nick worked with the Secular Coalition for America as the leader of a multi-million-dollar fundraising operation for the Democratic National Committee and other progressive and nonprofit groups. As an organizer that led field operations in North Carolina that knocked on more than 35,000 doors and registered more than 55,000 voters in the 2 months before the 2008 presidential election, helping Democratic candidates sweep the state. Nick is a native of Michigan and studied political science at Albion College. Please give a warm HSGP welcome for Nick Fish. Nick.
Thanks so much, Ron, and thank you everybody for inviting me today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, so just bear with me for one moment. See if we can make that work right away. Okay, I think you got it, right? All right. So I was kind of thinking about other things to talk about, but obviously the context of what's been happening over the last week or two made this feel very appropriate and timely, given the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and a lot of what's at stake for this year's election and what a lot of us are talking about and worried about. And so I wanted to not just kind of give us here are all the problems and we don't know what to do about them side of things, and there's not much we can do about them, but rather some alternatives and some ways that we're thinking about how we can continue advocating and fighting for our rights beyond just the federal court system. And I don't want to minimize the importance of the court system, but it can't be the solution to all of the challenges that we're facing. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today, is how we can branch out and think more broadly about ways to as you said in your introduction, put our values into action. So I think we have to start with kind of how we got to where we are today, and why it's important for us to be thinking about ways to advocate beyond just using the court system, using the legal system to defend the separation of religion from government and defend basic human rights. I think we all know that one of the primary projects of this administration has been call it packing the federal judiciary, but certainly confirming and nominating and confirming just an unprecedented number of federal judges. The numbers like we haven't seen since the Carter administration in the numbers that they've confirmed. So since the start of 2017, the administration has confirmed 53 circuit court judges and 161 district court judges. President Trump has appointed almost as many circuit court judges as President Obama did in 8 years. President Trump has in less than 4. President Obama appointed 55 circuit court judges. President Trump has appointed 53. Interestingly, this is the first time in more than 40 years that there has not been a vacancy on any circuit court. That's how effective this administration and the Senate have been in getting these confirmations through. At the district court level, President Trump has appointed obviously not as many judges as President Obama did in his 8 years, but has moving at a much faster rate. So he's confirmed a third, again, as many judges as President Obama had by this point in his presidency, which is, just a stunning number. More than 1 in 4 federal judges on the bench right now have been appointed by President Trump. But it's not just about numbers. This isn't just a partisan game. It has to do with the types of judges that have been appointed. The views of these judges have been, we'll say, outside the mainstream. They've been very dangerous on a number of key issues that I know members of our community are very concerned about, particularly on issues of religious equality, access to contraception and reproductive health care, LGBTQ issues, but also things related to labor organizing, unions, the role of money in politics, just things that I know many members of our community are very deeply concerned about on a personal level, and things that are really outside the mainstream of the American political system and majority of American voters. The most recent person who was confirmed to a circuit court judgeship that I think is emblematic of the problem here is a person by the name of Corey Wilson. He was confirmed to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. The Fifth Circuit is a court that presents a lot of issues, and we're seeing some very strange decisions come out of it because of the types of judges that have been put on the bench there. Corey Wilson was roundly criticized and opposed by civil rights groups, ranging from the NAACP and the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights to the Human Rights Campaign, American Atheists, Americans United. We all were really concerned about this nominee in particular. But again, he's one of a large number that have been very problematic in their views. He called for the complete and immediate reversal of Roe versus Wade. He called marriage equality pandering to liberal interest groups, as well as an attempt to make conservative Christians look bad. He also supported a 2016 Mississippi bill that was somewhat ironically called the Religious Liberty Accommodations Act, when he was a member of the Mississippi House of Representatives, that provided exemptions to generally applicable civil rights laws on the basis of religion, that would have allowed massive discrimination against LGBTQ people, while elevating one particular religious view above all others. And that is obviously the religious view that LGBTQ people are not entitled to marry, or very regressive views about human sexuality and sexual orientation. Those are the only types of religious views that were being protected under that Religious Liberty Accommodation Act, which sort of says, what they prioritize in religious liberty. But he is just, as I said, the latest example of the pure number of judges that have been confirmed to this level of court that really present problems for us in accessing the courts and in having favorable outcomes when we actually make it into court. And that's part of the problem, though. It's not just who is sitting on the bench and the decisions that are going to be made. It's actually getting into court in the first place. And this is something that I think a lot of folks don't know about, that is not part of the discussion as often, is narrowing what's called standing. Standing is the ability for those of us who want to protect our rights to access the court system. The federal judiciary requires standing, meaning that you've suffered some sort of real harm, that you have a concrete harm that you can articulate and that the courts can fix. And part of the problem is that many of these judges have a view on standing that is making it much harder for us to address systemic wrongs, because we can't in their view, point to specific actualized harm. We can't point and say, this caused me an injury. There have been cases that have been tossed just in the last few years on standing, including FFRF's, a couple of FFRF cases around the congressional invocation stuff, IRS cases suing over tax exemptions, numerous public display cases, being 10 Commandment monuments, crosses on public land, and so on. And that makes it very difficult for us to even get our foot in the door. And it makes it hard for us to actually win the fight if we can't actually argue on the merits of the case. And there are judges in place who want to further restrict that. And Brett Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch are certainly folks who have articulated a much narrower version of standing that is more in line with a Justice Thomas version, essentially saying that it's almost impossible for us to access the courts to protect church-state separation because we can't show real harm. If the government were to build or allow to be built a massive cross on public land, that's not actually harming us, according to them, because we're not suffering real injury. And even though anyone could look at that and say, well, that's an endorsement of religion, they would say, well, you're not suffering harm, so the courts aren't the place to deal with that. At the same time, while our rights are being minimized, while our ability to address court systems and address systemic harms in the court system is being pulled back, many of these cases on the other side, are being allowed to move forward just on the flimsiest possible justification involving religious harms or involving supposed claims of religious harms. Cases that, have made a lot of very bad precedent for us should never have been allowed to proceed in the first place. So just this last term, we had Espinoza versus Montana Department of Revenue. That's a case involving direct funding or scholarships subsidized by the government going to religious groups. Montana's constitution said that they can't allow, according to Montana's constitution, you can't directly fund or indirectly fund religious education or religious material. The state Supreme Court struck down the program. And then because of that, the legislature completely repealed the program. So there was no program anymore. Now, this case has worked its way up through and was decided by the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, no, you can't discriminate against religious groups in this scholarship program. Well, the problem is there is no scholarship program. It was repealed. And so it's very unclear what the court is saying Montana should do. Do they have to recreate this scholarship program that no longer exists? How are they showing harm or that a religious group was treated differently than a secular group because nobody received any scholarships? And so if we can't articulate harms that are hypothetical, or if we can't bring cases based on harms that are hypothetical, it's very confusing how this one was able to how this was able to make its way up to the Supreme Court and then be decided. Trinity Lutheran, we argued at the time that standing shouldn't have been granted for that. Trinity Lutheran is the case from Missouri from a few years ago involving the resurfacing of a playground. That was another one where there was no harm. A new administration came in and said, hey, listen, we'll give you money to resurface your playground, church. And the church said, no, we'd still like to continue suing for this. But there was no harm. Little Sisters of the Poor, that's another one where they were granted an exemption, they were granted an accommodation, and they wanted even more. And the court said, well, we have to kind of take their word for it that they're being harmed, which is not the greatest. And it's not just that religion is in general is being given preference in these cases over non-religion. It's that specific religions are being given preference over others. I think we all remember, even if you don't know the name of it, we all remember the Trump versus Hawaii case. That was the Muslim ban, the travel ban case. And in that case, the court said essentially that the president's rhetoric about Muslims wasn't really a problem. That the president has wide deference to kind of do whatever he wants on these matters of foreign policy and admitting people to the country, and that his rhetoric is not evidence of animus. It's not evidence of an unconstitutional animus toward a particular religion. However, in cases like Masterpiece Cake Shop, or right now the case that's before the Supreme Court for this term, Fulton versus Philadelphia, where we have one person who is a member of a commission, so not the president of the United States or not like the mayor of the town, not the decision maker, but rather one person on a larger body that is making a decision, says something that is true. In Masterpiece Cake Shop, one member of the commission, a civil rights commission, had said that religion had historically been used to justify discrimination, and that it was unfortunate that that was the case. In that case, the court found that that was evidence of animus toward religion. And in Fulton versus City of Philadelphia, obviously the court hasn't ruled yet. We haven't even heard arguments yet, but the argument that the group is making is that general sort of vague criticism of discriminatory actions by religious groups is evidence of anti-religion animus. And that animus argument is creeping into other cases as well. In Montana, in Espinoza versus Montana Department of Revenue that I just mentioned, a core argument that was made by Justice Alito was that any of these amendments that say that we don't want taxpayer dollars going to fund religious schools, that the mere existence of those constitutional amendments in these states is evidence of anti-Catholic animus. That's the whole reason that these amendments were passed was to be anti-Catholic, that there isn't any inherent benefit in preserving a secular society that isn't motivated by religious animus, essentially. And that's crazy. that's nuts. I mean, it's really just a leap forward in the way that they think about what animus is, and it really doesn't. It runs counter to common sense and to decades and centuries of precedent. And this is the problem here is they're kind of making things up as they go. And I don't know how many of you are fans of Calvin and Hobbes, but this is been referred to by some, and I kind of mentioned the challenges in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, that we're kind of playing by this new game now, where precedent doesn't matter, the rules don't matter, and the rules change as we go. And people are calling it judicial Calvinball. The idea of Calvinball, if you've not read or not familiar with Calvin and Hobbes, is Calvinball has no rules. You make it up as you go. You make it so that no Calvinball game is like any other. And the only rule is that you can't use the same rule twice, except the rule that you can't use the same rule twice. Like that's the summation of Calvinball. But that's what we're seeing right now in federal courts. And it's this kind of outcome motivated approach to the law that really is challenging, I think, to a lot of us. I think a lot of us have this idea in our heads, and especially those of us, those of you who are lawyers. I'm not a lawyer, but those folks that are lawyers, and this is part of who we are as non-religious people, as atheists, as humanists, is we think we have a pretty good sense of what the facts are, how to make an argument, how to win an argument, and that if we just make a better argument, usually we will win, right? That will convince people, that will come out ahead. Unfortunately, what's happening is that we can make the best argument, we can have all the history on our side, and it doesn't matter. We still lose because the rules of the game keep changing. And that's really frustrating. And it makes it very difficult for us to be effective advocates in the judiciary and in the courts when the rules, when the foundations of so many of these issues just are shifting under our feet constantly and are not consistent, never mind decade to decade, but session to session or court to court, or even internally consistent within each court, within each year. It really makes it challenging for us to look and say, yeah, this is going to be an effective way for us to advance our cause, for us to protect rights, and for us to vindicate abuses against the Constitution. And that's a very challenging and difficult place, I think, for many of us to be, especially when we've put so much, pardon the expression, faith in the use of the federal judiciary as a way to advance our rights. that makes it very challenging. And it can kind of lead to this feeling of hopelessness that I know some folks have articulated to me, saying, I just don't know what to do with this when things are changing all the time. And we keep losing these cases that should be slam dunks, and we keep getting thrown out of court when clearly we can show there's a problem. But then on the other hand, the opposite is not true for the other side. They're not clamping down uniformly. They're mainly targeting us. And so that's a problem. And it's not just obviously at the local or the district court or the circuit court level, although those are problems. Out of the 8,000 cases or so that the Supreme Court is asked to review each year, they only review about 80, something like that. The vast majority of cases that if we bring will be resolved at the circuit court level, where again, almost 55 judges have been confirmed to those circuit courts in just 4 years. And it really has changed the landscape, and it makes it very difficult. But we shouldn't pretend that the Supreme Court is not a concern either, just because we're not necessarily reaching it in every case. The Supreme Court is definitely a problem. It's been an uphill battle for the past 15 years, and it's only going to get worse. It's only going to continue to present many challenges for those of us who are engaged in this type of advocacy. In the past terms, we've had Our Lady of Guadalupe v. Morrissey Baru, which was about a private religious schools being able to fire employees, specifically teachers, for discriminatory reasons. So either in violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act or the Civil Rights Act or any number of other employment protections, by essentially claiming, well, they're ministers of the faith. Now, that characterization, that classification did not align with the employees' understanding of their jobs. They were not told that they were not protected by these things. In fact, one of them was told the opposite. But it doesn't matter, because they led their classes in prayer once a week or so. And that made them ministers of the faith. They didn't even have to be Catholic in these schools to be ministers of the faith, which I think speaks to the absurdity of some of these arguments. Another one was the American Humanist Association versus American Legion. This was the massive cross in Bladensburg, Maryland, that was declared to be not a religious symbol, because it had additional meaning as well, despite the fact that it was consecrated and was understood at the time to be a religious symbol. It suddenly, at some point, became not a religious symbol, apparently. And then I mentioned Espinoza versus Montana, requiring direct funding of religious schools, saying it's not only acceptable to do that, but also required if states are funding private schools. And we still don't know the fallout from that case. But as I said, these are just the last few in the last year or so. There are going to be more, and there have been previous ones as well. And it's going to continue to progress. Justices Gorsuch and Kavanaugh have expressed outright hostility to the type of work that we've done and the legal theories that we've advanced. And they've already been confirmed. Since joining the bench, they have really entrenched their positions on the Establishment Clause as being reliably opposed to ours, not necessarily going quite as far as someone like Justice Thomas. Justice Thomas actually believes that the Establishment Clause doesn't necessarily apply to states, which is interesting, but that's a very real problem. And Judge Amy Coney Barrett, who is the person that Donald Trump nominated yesterday, would unquestionably move the court even further in the direction toward protecting religious privilege and being suspicious of our arguments. This is an interesting image here. This is a cover from the American Law Journal, the National Law Journal, from January of 2018. And the four people pictured here in the top right-hand corner is Justice Gorsuch. He had already been confirmed. The bottom left is Justice Kavanaugh. He had not been yet nominated because Kennedy had not yet retired. The bottom right is Amy Coney Barrett, who obviously was just nominated. The top left is Don Willett, who is on the Seventh Circuit, I think. But I hope that there's not some sort of psychic working at the National Law Journal. That's a very concerning image that came in a little early. I'm worried about all that. So, but even in cases where there's a win, when we look at it and say, oh, this is great, like awesome, such as the Bostock decision, the Harris Funeral Homes case. These were the consolidated cases that decided that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibited discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. In his majority opinion in that case, Justice Gorsuch, Justice Gorsuch is someone who I think takes very seriously his argument about textualism, that the text of the law can sometimes have unintended consequences, and that's why he was the person who wrote the decision in Bostock. But what he also has a very strong view on is the idea that religious exemptions are not just acceptable, but required under the law and under the Constitution, perhaps. He practically invited a challenge to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 on the basis of religion. His majority opinion in that case had an entire paragraph saying petitioners here didn't respond. The Harris Funeral Homes did not raise this religion question on appeal. However, so we're not resolving it now. However, it could be the case that there are religious exemptions at play here that folks need to grapple with in the future. Judge Barrett, Amy Coney Barrett, had sided with churches wanting to ignore large gathering bans in Indiana. She, as I said, is currently a circuit court judge. She said that employers of all kinds have a religious freedom right to fully deny their employees contraception coverage. And she's also helped train lawyers at Alliance Defending Freedom, which I know is right in y'all's backyard. So, and as I previously discussed on the issue of standing, Coney Barrett has expressed hostility toward what's called the municipal taxpayer standing, which is a doctrine that allows taxpayers in municipalities and cities that are using their tax dollars to do things that are unconstitutional or illegal to challenge the use of those tax dollars. That's been the primary tool that we've been able to use to challenge direct funding of religious stuff at the local level for decades. And it's not just us, it's environmental groups, it's civil rights groups, it's any number of groups that have done the same. And she's expressed hostility toward that in a case involving actually the building of President Obama's library in Chicago. And so, that's going to be a challenge for us as well if she's confirmed. She's also said that Supreme Court judges shouldn't view precedent as necessarily binding, that it's okay to overrule precedents, but that there are certain cases that are what she calls super precedents, so cases that may have been wrongly decided in her view, but are so deeply entrenched in the law that you can't unwind it without just blowing up the system. Notably, she excludes from that list of super precedents Lemon v. Kurtzman, which many of you may have heard is the Lemon test, which is sort of the foundation of most of our Establishment Clause jurisprudence. She also has viewed Roe versus Wade as not a super precedent as well, so something that could certainly be overturned in her view. And both of those standards have been undermined over the last few years, but at the same time, they still are foundational to much of the work that we do on our side for Lemon and on the access for reproductive choice. Obviously, Roe versus Wade is the foundation of a lot of that. At this upcoming term, we have a couple of cases, two cases, in fact, that American Atheists has filed amicus briefs with and that we're monitoring closely. This is Fulton versus City of Philadelphia, which asks the question of whether or not taxpayer-funded adoption and foster agencies that are given money directly by taxpayers and given power of the state to carry out programs have to obey non-discrimination rules. Obviously, we would think that they do, but the argument that they're making is that the city can't even cancel a contract or not renew a contract with a Catholic service provider because it shows animus. The failure to renew that contract shows animus. The other one is kind of under the radar. It is less of a implication of a specific right or something that I think would affect us directly, any of us, on this meeting directly. But it's Tanzan versus Tanvir, which is a case that is a little complicated, but essentially the federal government spied on and harassed and put on a do not fly list some Muslim Americans who sued under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act and want to collect monetary damages from individual government employees. Now, our argument is essentially that the government obviously abused its power here, that this was ridiculous conduct, this was outrageous conduct, but that RFRA does not allow collecting money from government employees, and that if we allowed that to move forward, we would have a system where people, especially with the drastic expansion of RFRA, where federal employees, state government employees, anyone could be on the hook for an innocent mistake or a claim being made in bad faith about religious liberty. Again, given the drastic expansion that we've seen of RFRA claims in the last few years. So those are two we're watching. Fulton versus City of Philadelphia, does have some really dark possibilities and dark implications if it goes the wrong way. And with Amy Coney Barrett on the court, if she is confirmed, we're not terribly hopeful. That case is actually being argued the day after the election. So that'll be interesting. Cases we're tracking that are kind of working their way up through the courts. Kennedy versus Bremerton School District. This is you may have seen the news about this one. This is a case where a football coach refused to stop leading his students in prayer after football games and was disciplined and then fired because he wouldn't not do it. And he's suing the school district for violating his religious freedom rights. And then another one is Gruscott versus Milwaukee Jewish Day School, which is attempting to expand out the already massive loophole that was created by Our Lady of Guadalupe versus Morrissey Baru, where they're basically arguing that courts can't conduct any sort of analysis as to whether or not school employees are ministers of the faith. We just have to take their word for it. And ironically, Judge Barrett joined an opinion in the Seventh Circuit, where this case is currently at, and it may end up at the Supreme Court, that went further than what the Supreme Court did in Our Lady of Guadalupe, saying, yeah, we can't even ask. We have to just take the school's word for it. There's no analysis that can be done. If the school says this person is a minister of the faith, then they're a minister of the faith. We can't even analyze it. It's so out of reach. It would be like determining whether or not a Catholic priest was fired appropriately, and that's so inherently ingrained in the core of what it means to protect religious freedom that the courts can't even get involved in that, which obviously creates some very big problems for people who are employees at a Catholic school, who are nurses at a Catholic hospital, who are social workers at a Catholic adoption and foster care agency. And that's what we're talking about. That's the scale of what we're talking about here. So, if everything is terrible, which a lot of it is, what are we supposed to do about it? Well, in my view, the answer here is to pick our battles, but also pick the battlefield. If the federal court system is, giving us lemons, then we should try to find another place to make lemonade. And what we have been doing at American Atheists, and what we'll continue to be doing, is to focus on state level advocacy and state level fixes to some of these problems. One of the most important things we can do is to advance legislative fixes that are, I don't want to call them boring, because they're not. They're important, but they're not. It's not like a big thing that people are getting fired up about. One of those would be expanding access to state courts, by extension, and often by extension federal courts, with legislation guaranteeing standing. Another one is to use legislation to fix some of the most dangerous laws. So to fix RFRA and state level RFRAs, which Arizona has, to just add a new law that says RFRA doesn't apply to this type of case. And the third thing we can do is be innovative and find partners, expand our reach, find additional opportunities for collaboration with people that we share core values with, and build legitimacy that way. So I'm going to start with the first one, which is legislative fixes for dangerous laws. We have, and this is a tool that we're going to be releasing soon, but I'm giving you all a sneak peek of it. So don't screenshot this yet. We might make some changes, but this is the idea. So we have a state do no harm act. Arizona does have a RFRA style law. It's called FERA, Free Exercise of Religion Act, on the books. This law has already been used to undermine civil rights protections, including in Phoenix, Phoenix had passed a law banning discrimination against LGBT people in public accommodations, and you all probably remember the brush and nib case that was, kind of a big story. If I remember correctly, they hadn't actually been asked to do a wedding invitation. They just sort of preemptively sued, saying that this would violate their deeply held religious beliefs, which is another example of sort of dodgy business going on with standing. But essentially what these do no harm acts say is they change or they amend RFRA, and they say essentially that, or in Arizona's case, FIRA, they essentially say, listen, RFRA is fine. We want to protect minority religious rights from, the burden of government action. We don't want people, being put upon by government when it doesn't make sense to do so. But at the same time, you can't shift that burden to a third party. You can't push off discrimination onto another person simply because it inconveniences your religion, which is a lot of what we've seen RFRA do in the last few years, is be used as that weapon. Instead of a shield to protect your own religious beliefs and your own religious expression, it's being used as a weapon to attack people, usually LGBT people, folks seeking contraception and abortion, and so on. And so what these laws do is they basically just say, all right, RFRA, FIRA don't apply to the following types of laws. So they wouldn't apply to civil rights protections. They wouldn't apply to non-discrimination laws. They wouldn't apply to fair housing laws, family medical leave laws, wage laws, anything like that. RFRA no longer applies. That the government has such a strong interest in these things that we're saying RFRA or FIRA doesn't apply, and that you can't raise those concerns in court. And what that means is that they have a higher standard to clear, higher bar to clear, to prove that their rights are in some way being infringed upon, because it's no longer just a statute saying, yep, if it infringes on your religion, we take your word for it, and the government has to use the least restrictive way possible of advancing whatever this compelling interest is. Now it rises to a higher level and makes it easier for government to enact these laws by just saying, we have an important legislative purpose here. Yes, it may infringe on your religion, but this is so important, too bad, which is exactly what we did during the Civil Rights Movement. These same arguments were made against the Civil Rights Act. People saying, I have a religious belief that segregation is important and that you're preventing me from doing that, and therefore you need to not. And the Supreme Court said, no, sorry. We have an important government role in reducing discrimination, ending discrimination, that I'm sorry that it burdens your religion, but that's too bad. If you're going to go into the act of commerce, you have to serve everyone, period. So the advantages to this approach is that it doesn't require the repeal of RFRA or FIRA. That's been a big burden or hurdle for us for years. We've encouraged the repeal, and we still believe that it would be best to repeal these laws, but it's very hard to do that, in part because nobody wants to be the legislator that repealed religious freedom, right? Like that's how it would obviously be painted. The other advantage here is this has already been introduced and passed in the U.S. House. Obviously, it died in the Senate or hasn't been taken up in the Senate, but it's a major priority for LGBT groups, for secular and atheist groups and humanist groups, church-state separation groups, and so on, healthcare groups. So you'll find a lot of partners and allies to help with this. Disadvantages here are that if courts start finding that these religious exemptions are constitutionally required, in other words, it's not a product of RFRA or FIRA that says that we have to give these exemptions, but it's part of the Constitution, these laws are kind of worthless. And also it has the potential of making bad law, where if they don't have this route of using RFRA or FIRA, that they may try to bring in the Constitution, which presents some problems if it goes the wrong way. And again, going back to my Judicial Calvinball slide, we just don't know. We think that this is the best approach to take the teeth out of RFRA and FIRA for the purposes of civil rights laws and protections, but there are risks. Another piece of legislation that we have, and again, this will be coming out as part of our tool kit, and certainly have folks from American Atheists reach out to us have Luke, have Ron, touch base, and we're happy to share these tools with you as soon as we finalize them, and we will be finalizing them soon, is what we call the Constitutional Rights Protection Act. This bill would expand access to the courts to allow everyday Americans to receive justice that are currently being shut out. State courts are not limited in the ways that federal courts are by the Constitution, Article 3 of the Constitution. The state court jurisdiction comes from state constitutions, comes from state legislation. And if we pass a bill that just says courts can address these issues and people who are seeking to address these issues have standing to address these issues, that's all it takes is being able to say, yep, you can have a day in court to address this systemic problem, even if you can't show direct personal harm. You can still vindicate the rights of the community in this way. This is an opportunity for us as well, because passing these bills would require building a coalition of diverse organizations with interests in guaranteeing access to the courts. That can include groups that fight for environmental issues, civil rights groups, consumer protection groups, legal aid providers, good governance groups, and just literally any group that works to address systemic issues such as police violence, homelessness, or anything like that. We can, building that large coalition, by doing so, we can demonstrate to lawmakers that legal standing just touches on so many issues that are central to what it means to fight for our rights, and help show how this somewhat confusing, elusive court doctrine can harm constituents by clamping down on the ability to access justice. This type of work enhances our legitimacy as a community, the legitimacy of our groups as coalition builders, as wanting to work collaboratively with partners to pass something that isn't flashy, it isn't splashy, it isn't like a big headline grabbing thing, but rather is about laying the foundation, about laying the groundwork for, legal battles, for things that can take 20, 30 years to come to fruition. And it shows, a commitment to that type of long thinking and planning and structural reform that is really necessary for much of what we want to accomplish to get done, if we want to return to the courts. And I think at the end of the day, having this as a tool in our toolkit is really important. But at the same time, it can't be the only thing that we do. And it feeds into that opportunity to work across different types of activism, across different types of advocacy. And that's a really important part of this, because at the end of the day, one of the great benefits of this type of work is that it allows us to build stronger communities. It allows us to build more robust communities that stand the test of time, and that can weather some of these challenges like what we're facing now. Finding allies, building consensus, and increasing our involvement in our local communities and in public life is central to what has been a recipe for success for religious groups over the years, and is something that I know that perhaps better than you all know this, perhaps better than anyone else in the country, that having a vibrant community that does lots of different things and touches on important areas of civic life and on public life is the best way to build a large sustainable group that has a vibrant community surrounding it. And we want to encourage more groups to do the same. The reason for this is our community has a broad range of priorities, a broad set of interests in things that they find important. There is massive consensus around what we should focus on, or around the issues that are important to us. So secular public schools, people are very concerned about denying access to healthcare based on religious belief, denying access to abortion and contraception. The thing down at the bottom there, opposing religious displays on public property, I don't want to pretend that that's not an important issue. It is, but at the same time, with so much going on in the world right now, the question of where to focus finite resources is often on the things that are most acutely affecting our community, and that's issues of access to healthcare, access to contraception and abortion, discrimination, and public schools. Those are the areas where people are feeling the most pressure, the most acute attack on their rights, and so that's where people are really finding a lot of common ground. And it's an opportunity for us to build coalitions with groups, because there are a wide range of groups that are also concerned about these issues. And then if we ask people, all right, well, where do we focus those things? The answer is the number one priority: maintaining secular public schools. Below that, there's sort of a cluster of 5 around religious exemptions and use of weaponizing of religion, and then there below, but very down there, all the way down there at the bottom, is focusing on religious displays on public property. And so part of the message here is that the things that allow us to build power, allow us to invest in the future of our community, that allow us to build institutional power and partnerships and collaboration, are the places where the majority, the largest chunk of our community wants us to focus our efforts. And that's an important, piece of information. That's an important data point for us. The other reason to do this is, that participation makes a big difference in the way that we go about, in the way that we think about communities. That when we conducted our U.S. secular survey, and this is from our first report on that survey, Reality Check, which is available at secularsurvey.org, we found that participation in a local group or a national organization or participating in one of the social activities or secular activities was a really important way of reducing likelihood of depression. We know that people who are in highly religious communities, communities that where they experience a high degree of social stigma and discrimination, are much more likely to screen positive for indicators of depression, but that membership in a national organization or participation in a local group were highly insulating factors, reducing instances of discrimination between 1/4 and 1/3 compared to non-participants and non-members. And so by getting more people involved, we're actually improving the overall mental health of our community, and making sure that people have the support that they need in highly religious, discriminatory, stigmatizing communities, which I think is a worthwhile goal in of itself, but it also has the added benefit of, improving the community around us, which is, a nice benefit. And, if you look at the bottom figure there, engagement with local secular activities, something like 60% of people were interested in debates and lectures, volunteering, advocacy, like all of those things people found sort of equally interesting. And, about half of people wanted social activities. The big one that was, I think, interesting was almost 3/4 of people, if they had children, were interested in resources for those kids. And so if you have people who are, who have children and you're not programming thinking about those children, you're missing a really big opportunity to both grow your community, but also to meet the needs of the community as it exists, and also to bring in people who otherwise wouldn't have even thought to join your community before. And so, these are opportunities. These are, there's no like one standout here. All of these things people are interested in. And the thing that we're seeing from the most successful groups like yours is that you're meeting all of these needs, or you're doing your best to meet all of those needs where you can. And that's really important. And so thank you for doing that, because it really makes a huge difference. But at the end of the day, what this means is we can't just do one or the other. We can't just have these types of discussions and lectures. We need to go out there and do volunteering. We need to go out there and do advocacy. We need to go out there and have social activities. We need to have programming that is thoughtful and accommodating and accessible for people with kids. All of those things are really important in of themselves, but also because they feed into those larger goals of creating a better world around us. So with that, I think I'm pretty close to the time that I said I would be. And so I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. So if anybody has any questions, you can go ahead and raise your hand and I will call on you, or you can unmute yourself one at a time, please. And or if you would like to type your question in the chat, I'll go ahead and read it. So I'll go ahead and read a couple of the questions that came through over chat. One is from Susan. What is American Atheists' current attitude towards humanists? 2 previous predecessors were not inclined towards favorable acceptance.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, Susan. And my attitude on this has always been that type of divisiveness and just backbiting rhetoric from people who are in a position of having a big podium, having a big microphone is not helpful, and it's not what the type of work that we want to do. We want to be collaborative. We really want people to understand that there are different approaches to this. There's different ways of going about the work that we do, but we're all on the same team here. And I really want people to be able to take, especially within our community and our partners, I want people to be able to take us at our word and to find the experience of working with us to be heartening and to be productive. Personally, I think I have a really good relationship with Roy Speckhart. I think I have a really good relationship with Robin Blumner at CFI. I think I have a good we all have really good relationships. And one of the other structural challenges over the years has been historic tension between FFRF and American Atheists for a variety of reasons that dates back to even before I was born, or around the time I was born, I guess. And so the thing is that a lot of those tensions were not resolved and were in some cases enhanced due to personality conflicts or personal conflicts that I don't have the time or the inclination for. Our world is on fire. There's so much going on right now that if we're not regularly having meetings to work together, to find opportunities to collaborate, then what are we doing? This is not the time for us to have these fights about things that at the end of the day are not going to improve people's lives. I'm much more interested in what we're doing today and what we're building capacity for tomorrow, to make a difference, to move the needle. Coming from the area of working in frontline programming staff where we do work together all the time, and then coming to the point of executive leadership gives me a different perspective. I'm not sort of saddled with the history of the tension there, but rather the collaboration that we've done over the last my entire career in the secular community. And so I think that's really important. We encourage our affiliates to be members and to be supportive of the great work that the other groups are doing. There's not this what's a good word for it? There's not this drive to shut people out or have big egos about it. Our policy people meet at least once a month. Our legal teams meet at least once a month. We just signed a memorandum of understanding that we haven't yet announced yet with FFRF to share legal complaints with them, to make sure that people are not having to go back and forth to different groups to find an answer, but rather they're getting an answer where we can, and that we're maximizing the resources that we do have. Because the fact is that one group on the religious right, we'll pick Alliance Defending Freedom, has more money than all of our groups combined times 3, and that's one group. And never mind their network of volunteers and this pipeline that they've created to feed into themselves. We can't afford to leave anything on the table if we're serious about protecting the rights of atheists, agnostics, and humanists, and the larger American public from intrusions of Christian nationalism into our public, into public life. And so I'm very happy with the collaboration that's increased and that's happened over the last few years.
Yeah, I coming in after that, I don't see a reason for conflict or divisiveness. I absolutely agree with you, and hope to continue to further that collaboration, because as far as I'm concerned, we're all on the same team.
Yeah, and I will add, there are big differences that happen sometimes where people have, and I don't want to give the impression, and this is the sort of other side of that, where you say, well, we shouldn't fight about anything, right? And you said it at the beginning, if we're not willing to stand for something, what are we going to fall for? I think is what you said. There are times when you have to take a stand and say, okay, look, these are core values, and we're disagreeing about this thing. We're disagreeing about a core value. That's when, and this happens a lot in some local groups that are sort of just getting started, where there may be, something where core values are not in alignment. And that's completely fine. You can start your own group, you can do your own thing, but you still need to find opportunities to collaborate. You still need to set aside those differences sometimes to come together. But I'm also not going to tell, somebody who is LGBT that they have to work with, and they need to set aside their disagreements with someone who thinks, who is an atheist or is a humanist, who says that, the government shouldn't tell public accommodations that they have to serve LGBT people. I'm very strongly opposed to that idea. Well, I'm not going to tell an LGBT person, well, you need to get over it and work with this person all the time. I mean, sometimes there are just fundamental disagreements that you're not going to see eye to eye on. But from an organizational perspective, if you can bridge those gaps, I think it's really important to do it, to like put everything in perspective, right? And if we're talking about your core humanity and it's like this one person that you're repeatedly being asked to work with who, is not such a fan of your core humanity, I'm not going to say you need to go work with that person because your own mental health, your own values, your own core is important there too, and that person needs to get with the program. So,
yeah. Debbie says, "I'm so glad to see American Atheists and FFRF working together." Mickey, did you have a question? Did you unmute yourself for a question? Nope. All right.
No question. Just a thank you. This was fascinating, depressing, but fascinating.
I hope there was some glimmer of hope in there that we can do some of this.
That people like you are there and trying to be effective in this fight.
I'm not, as much as I am a sort of positive, upbeat person, I am also not a, blow rainbows and smoke up your in your general direction to tell you everything's just fine, because that's not a way of getting anything done.
Right.
But I'm also I'm not one of those people that, catastrophizes everything and says, this is the single biggest threat to blah, blah, blah. Like, everything can't be the single greatest threat ever. There are a lot of big threats out there, but, there's something we can do about some of those, and we have to be innovative about it.
Well, like you say, pick your battles. And like Judge Ginsburg always said, you're working toward a better future, bit by bit.
Yep. Thank you. So there's been a couple questions about the Satanic Church, productive or not, and it being an atheist organization and working in ways that these groups can't work. Mm-hmm. Is that ideas or thoughts on that?
Yeah. The Satanic Temple, again, a group that I have a good relationship with. I'm friends with Lucien Greaves, who is one of the founders and the spokespeople for the Satanic Temple. What that last point there, that they can do things that we can't, is exactly true, because they are in many ways, a bona fide religious group, and a group like American Atheists will never claim that label. There are congregational humanist groups, so I'm thinking of groups like the American Ethical Union and Sunday Assembly that more closely fit that definition, so that sort of secular humanist religious congregationist label. I know that the American Ethical Union and groups like the Society for Ethical Culture embrace that as an important part of their identity, is they are a religious group, even if they are a non-theistic religious group. They are a congregation, and as such, the parts of the tax code that apply to churches apply to them, and so they're not required to do IRS Form 990. They're not required to do all that same stuff that secular groups are. The Satanic Temple, has a slightly different sort of aesthetic for obvious reasons, and it works in exposing the hypocrisy of some of the people who are the loudest, are the loudest about protesting for religious freedom, when what they mean is Christian nationalist supremacy. They mean Christian right-wing conservative Christian privilege, and exposing that hypocrisy is important, but at the same time, it only gets us so far. And one of the concerns that we always have with these with some of the actions from the Satanic Temple, and when we have these discussions privately and we share that, and I'm not going to criticize what they're doing point by point or imply in any way that I think that on balance that they're not doing great work. But one of the things that, if you think about the approach here, and you say, all right, RFRA applies to religious groups, or excuse me, applies to Satanic Temple members who want to access abortions. I agree that people should be able to access abortions, but it's important to show your work in these cases. It's important to use the right tools. The problem with using RFRA is that it legitimizes these exemptions. It says that, exemptions from generally applicable laws are appropriate when someone has a religious objection to it. Now, that's a problem because a growing chunk of Americans don't have a religious exemption to things, and are not affiliated with a particular religion. So depending on how you ask the question, anywhere between 5 and 10 or 12% of Americans don't believe in God. They may not use the word atheist. Another, a quarter of Americans or more are not affiliated with any particular religion. And you can divide that group up into various chunks. And then a third to 40% of young people are non-religious. And so you're foreclosing the ability for people to access equality under the law because they're not members of a particular religious demographic. And the other problem there is it creates this web of complication where people are asked to, we have to kind of tease out what laws apply to everybody and what laws don't. And creating a situation where all of these laws don't actually apply to everyone as long as you check a box that says that your objection is religious in nature rather than philosophical or rather than policy-based or whatever. That can create some problems. And then there's the added problem of the hypocrisy itself. Exposing the hypocrisy is one thing. Getting them to do anything about it or care that they're being hypocrites is another. We've had multiple court cases now where judges have said, well, the Satanic Temple is not a real religion, which is in of itself, baffling. It's not true. They are, in fact, they have a doctrine. They check all of the boxes of a religious belief. But it presents challenges when judges are given the authority to look at what is unquestionably a religious tradition and saying that's not a real religion. At earliest days of Mormonism, I think that they would have said, well, that seems a little grifty, right? You got a guy who's charged with fraud, who's now like, okay, I have gold plates, they're very real, and I need some of your money, and we're going to take a pilgrimage, right? Like the New York Times was publishing when Mormonism was created, right? Like this is not that long ago. And so, putting that power into the hands of judges, I'm very skeptical about, because I think it's important to think systemically. I think it's important for us to think about this from a principled perspective that, yeah, it's great to stick it to the state of Missouri and use their tools against them to say, you're going to ban abortion? Oh yeah, well, abortion is now a sacrament. Like what now, right-wing Christians? Well, most of the time they're going to come back and say, well, you're not a real religion, so buzz off. And because it's a court and we have in this country judicial supremacy, and they're like, that's where we're left with. And that's like, we didn't move the ball any further. And in fact, we just reinforced the argument that religion entitles us to a special treatment. And that's my concern with a lot of that. Now, again, I think there are times when it's better to have a group like the Satanic Temple making the argument, especially in public display cases. Like they are unquestionably more appropriately suited for making those like different religious perspective arguments for those types of limited public forum cases that we come up with. But for like weaponizing RFRA against the religious right, I'm skeptical of the approach, and I think that it can have some unintended consequences that we're not fully grappling with yet, and we just need to be really thoughtful about the way that we approach it.
And that goes for the same thing with Flying Spaghetti Monster, correct?
Yeah, for any of those religious groups that are kind of based on that idea of challenging religious privilege. We just have to be really thoughtful about it, and we don't know how it's going to play out is the challenge, and it could be good or it could be catastrophically bad, sort of where we're at right now. And so I come down more on the side of let's take measured steps that we are where we think that we can make some real progress rather than trying to grab it all at once and and we have to kind of get over the idea that simply exposing the hypocrisy is enough, because sometimes they just don't care.
Yeah, we don't always win the argument based on good ideas and valid
Yeah.
data.
Yeah, and that's the fact. So,
anyone else have any questions?
Hal, raise
Go
his hand
Hal.
there.
I can't see people raising their hands because I'm in speaker view because I only have one monitor.
Hal, you're muted if you're talking there. Are you able to find it?
Yeah,
Oh, there you go. There you go.
There you go.
Oh,
You're muted again.
Yeah, whatever you clicked, click it again.
unmute.
There you go. You're good. You're good.
Okay,
Good.
you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep, we got you. Go ahead.
Okay. As a supporter of American Atheists for quite a while, I would like to congratulate you on this American Atheist, which is the slickest publication of all the many publications that I receive from many similar organizations. So congratulations on your publication.
Well, thank you for that. We had to kind of go into a little hiatus here over the summer because of COVID, and having to take everything remote. So we skipped an issue. So I apologize if anyone is a member and you haven't received one since I think it was we did January, March, April, May, June. June was the last one that went out. So if you haven't gotten one during the summer, it's coronavirus. We apologize. You will be getting another one here shortly. But yeah, thank you so much. We appreciate that. It was part of one of the things that I wanted to do was make sure people knew what was going on and that it was an accessible and some bite-sized stuff in there with one or two longer pieces, but not quite as lengthy of a long dissertation on something, but rather here are some important news stories that you need to know. Here's what we're doing in response to it, and then here are some thoughts about larger issues as well. So thank you for that. I appreciate that, Hal.
Yep, we're looking forward.
Thank you so much.
So there's a comment here about if the priority is secular schools, right? Does American Atheists or AZ Atheists officially endorse any of the educational down ballot opportunities, such as Invest in Ed here in Arizona, or any of the other educational opportunities throughout the nation, really?
No shortage of them. Yeah. So American Atheists, by design, we are a 501c3. We do not have like an action fund or a C4 that can weigh in on electoral issues. The good thing about some of these ballot issues is they're not partisan in that way, so we can really talk about them more openly. And if you feel that investing in your schools is an important part of investing in the future of your community, pardon the expression, God bless, like go nuts, right? Like invest all you want. I'm the child of a public school teacher. Both of my parents were public employees, and my mom spent 30 years teaching in public schools. I will always support public schools, and it's certainly one of my top priorities as the leader of a national organization is to build partnerships with educational groups and to make sure that we're appropriately resourcing groups that are supporting what's going on in public schools. So whether that be medically accurate sex ed, whether that be teaching better science in public schools, whether that be supporting groups that are based in schools, ensuring students' rights in schools, all those things are top priorities for me and will continue to be. As far as the specifics of that measure, I don't know enough about Arizona's specific case. And in general, we would not endorse, even if we could, like endorsing a particular ballot initiative is probably right on that line where it's electoral, but it's not partisan. So you're probably not going to get sued over it or lose your 501c3 status. But, but what I would encourage people to do, and what I always say is be informed about what's happening in your community. And if it's something that you care about, be unapologetically vocal about it and find other people that also care about it and bring them in, right? And so if you're passionate about it, and this is what I tell everybody, if you're passionate about an issue, by definition, it is now a humanist or atheist issue. because you care about it, because you are passionate about it. If you think for one moment that, you know, the members of the local Catholic parish think about, well, does the Catholic Church endorse X, Y, or Z policy before they go to a town board meeting and say, you know, hi, I'm Bill with the local Catholic Church? They don't. They're using that as an indication of their membership, of their affiliation, and to show that they have some sort of like larger institutional backing behind them, that they, you know, as a signal of like what type of person they are. So if you are going out there, and I'm not gonna, you know, I'm not gonna tell you all how to run your group, but if you go out there and say, you know, hi, I'm Nick, and I'm with American Atheists. It's not that American Atheists is endorsing the position; it's that I'm with American Atheists, and that's it. It's used illustratively, not as an endorsement. If you walk in and say, you know, hi, I'm with the Humanist Society of Greater Phoenix, you know, I'm concerned about mass transit, and I want there to be an additional bus stop and, you know, higher capacity added to this bus route to make sure that people are able to get to and from work, to get out of the core of Phoenix, to get out to the further area. Like, that's great, and you should do that. And what ends up happening is you find people at those meetings, especially if it's something that, you know, again, implicates a core value that we all talk about. And you say, you know, this is something that I'm here with it, and we have 3 other members here with me. We all support this. You know, how can we be helpful? It's a signal that you as a group, and more specifically, you as an individual who is a member of that group, are committed to investing your time, your sweat, and sometimes your money in improving your community around you. And it creates this feedback where people for whom that's their core issue, right? Maybe, I don't know a ton of people who are like that into transit, but there are some. But if it's the environment, if it's LGBT issues, if it's contraception and birth control or abortion, that are very concerned about those issues. And that's the primary identity that they have, that they kind of organize their activist life around. You can pull those people in and say, oh, actually, there are a lot of folks here at the Humanist Society that are very concerned about this. You know, have you ever considered coming to one of our meetings? I'd love to introduce you around. You know, I'm sure that there's a lot of people who would love to meet you because you seem really great. And all of my friends here are really great as well, and we'd love to meet you. You know, it's not like this like naked transactional thing of like, come help us, we'll come help you. But rather it's a building a genuine relationship across different issue areas and across different, almost like friend groups. You can find new friends that you can bring in to strengthen the character of your local group and the work that you do. And who knows, they may also be super interested in, you know, hiking. I know that's somewhat of a challenge, like during the summer. Like up here, we go hiking in the summer. For you guys, that's probably not like the core, like summertime pastimes. So don't do that. But, you know, you find people who are interested in those sorts of social events that, you know, they would want to go to maybe. And this is what people tell us here. You know, they have people who come to a group meeting and say, oh, I'm so glad I found you guys because, you know, you do hiking and I really want to do hiking. But the only hiking group around me is with the church. And, you know, it's great to go hiking and I love hiking with people, but I really don't like the implication or the expectation that I show up also for these religious events, you know, and that I'm preached to all the time. And so I'm so glad I found this group, right? And so it's a great way to generate like a feedback loop where you can identify new members, you can, you know, bring people in who then enrich your group as well, that you met because you branched out and you went out there to something that, you know, it isn't an official group position, but rather is just something that members of your group are passionate about and interested in. So.
Yeah, awesome. I think being informed is a critical piece of that because when you know better, you do better, right? That's right. And you said something at the beginning that I want to touch base on. You said that you have faith in the judicial system.
I think
it just shows how useful faith is.
Yeah. I think at one time, many of us had faith in the judicial system. I don't know if it's accurate to say that I currently have faith in the judicial system for a variety of reasons, not just, you know, Supreme Court, federal court, you know, civil rights issues. I think a lot of us have concerns right now about, you know, fundamental fairness in our local system, in our local criminal justice system. And that's something that, again, we should be unapologetic about going out there and raising those concerns about and trying to make better. So.
Yep. So before I close it up, would you like to have any last words, sir?
Just, I want to just thank everybody. I see some very familiar names here. So I want to just thank everybody who is a member of American Atheists. If you like what we're doing, again, I hope that you'll support the work that we're doing. Our website is atheists.org, pretty straightforward there. And thank you everybody for all the time, all the, again, blood, sweat, and tears that you invest in making your community better. We speak with Luke and Ron and everybody down in Arizona quite frequently. And just we're blown away by the caliber of the work that you all do, the type of community that you're building. And it's very impressive. And it's a model that, we want to replicate with groups all throughout the country. And we point to groups like yours, and yours in particular, very frequently as things for other groups to aspire to. And that's really only possible because of the people, not the leaders, but the people. Leaders make a difference, but at the end of the day, it's the core, it's the group of human beings that make up the group that really show who you are. And so I can't thank you enough for all of that. It really is so impressive for me to see, as somebody who works with and sees groups all throughout the country, that you guys are really killing it. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for bringing this to us today. I loved it. I loved it. Thank you. And we're going to wrap it up. So if you enjoyed our content, hit that subscribe button, contribute to our Patreon account, or even better, become a member of HSGP and volunteer to do things. So go ahead and unmute everybody if you'd like and say goodbye. We're going to go ahead and stop the stream.
Nick, it's always a pleasure.
Thanks for the invite, everybody.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I was hoping my cat would want